Every child under 2, every single one, that was the order. Not from a warlord on a battlefield, from a king, one who built the greatest temple in Jewish history, who had armies and the full backing of Rome. And he used all of that to hunt a baby. This is where the most important story in Western history begins. Not with triumph, with grief, and with a question historians have debated for 2,000 years. Did it actually happen, and what kind of man gives that order? The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, opens with a group of unlikely visitors, scholars from the East, possibly from Persia or Babylon, arrive in Jerusalem. They are following a star, and they ask a dangerous question in a very dangerous place. Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? They are asking this inside the palace of the current King of the Jews. His name is Herod. History calls him the Great. When he hears those words, Matthew says he was disturbed. The Greek word is stronger. It suggests something closer to shaking, like the ground moving under his feet. Herod calls together his priests and scholars. Where is this child supposed to be born? Bethlehem, they say, a small farming village 8 kilometers south of Jerusalem. Poor families, nobody important, no political threat by any measure. But Herod does not measure threats the way other people do. He meets the wise men privately. He asks exactly when the star first appeared. He does the math. Then he tells them, find the child and come back to report his location. He says he wants to worship this child too. He does not want to worship anyone. The wise men find the child. They bring gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then, warned in a dream, they return home by a different road. They never go back to Herod. And when Herod realizes he has been outwitted, something breaks. Matthew uses a specific Greek phrase, ethumothe. He was exceedingly enraged, not annoyed, not frustrated, enraged beyond measure. He issues the order, all male children, 2 years old and under, Bethlehem and the surrounding area, every single one. Matthew closes the passage with the words of the prophet Jeremiah. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more. It is one of the most devastating passages in the entire New Testament. To understand what Herod did, you first have to understand what Herod was. He was not fully Jewish by heritage. His father was Idumean, from a people forcibly converted to Judaism a generation earlier. His mother was Arab. He did not become king through Jewish tradition or divine appointment. He became king by a vote of the Roman Senate. Rome gave him his crown. That means his power had exactly one real foundation: Rome's continued approval. Herod ruled Judea for more than 30 years. He built extraordinary things: a deep-water port city, a fortress palace carved into the Judean hillside, and the expansion of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, which became one of the wonders of the ancient world. But the historical record of Herod is not primarily a record of construction. It is a record of killing. The historian Flavius Josephus documents his violence in careful detail. Herod ordered the drowning of the young high priest Aristobulus. He executed his own wife Mariamne and mourned her obsessively for years afterward. He had 2 of his own sons put to death. On his deathbed, he reportedly ordered that the leading men of Jerusalem be killed when he died, so the nation would be forced to mourn. This is the man behind the order at Bethlehem. Not a mythological villain, a real documented king with a real documented pattern. Here is where the story becomes genuinely unsolved. Josephus records all of those killings with precision, but he never mentions Bethlehem. The massacre, one of the most dramatic events at the opening of the Christian story, is completely absent from the most detailed historical account of Herod's reign. What do we do with that? Some scholars argue the answer is straightforward: scale. Bethlehem was a small village. Demographic estimates suggest there may have been between 10 and 30 male infants under 2 years old living there at the time. For Josephus, writing about a king who ordered the deaths of hundreds, this may have been too small to record. Terrible, but historically invisible. Others point to something more complex. They notice that Matthew's account follows a very recognizable structure. A powerful king orders the death of a child. The family flees to Egypt. The child returns to fulfill his destiny. It is structurally identical to the story of Moses and Pharaoh in the book of Exodus. New Testament scholar R.T. France has argued that Matthew uses deliberate literary architecture, modeling the birth of Jesus on the birth of Moses, to signal to his Jewish readers that this is the fulfillment of the oldest story they knew. In this reading, the massacre is not only a historical report, it is also a theological statement. But one interpretation does not cancel the other. Matthew may be reporting real events and framing them through the lens of prophecy. That is exactly how first-century writers worked. What is most striking is what Matthew does at the end of the passage. God warns Joseph in a dream. The family escapes. Jesus is saved. But the other children of Bethlehem receive no warning. They are not saved. They die precisely because Jesus was there, and Matthew never explains this. He quotes Rachel weeping and simply lets the grief stand, without resolution. Some scholars believe this is entirely intentional. Matthew is not hiding the cost of the story. He is refusing to look away from it. Psychologists who study authoritarian leaders describe a pattern called persecutory thinking, where a person in power begins to see threats everywhere, not because the threats are necessarily real, but because their entire sense of identity depends on remaining unchallenged. Herod fits this pattern almost exactly. He was never truly accepted as a legitimate Jewish king. He knew it. The people around him knew it. Every prophecy about a coming king, every rumor of arrival, every whispered question about his bloodline fed a fear that had no real solution. Because what Herod feared was not a specific person, it was the possibility of being replaced, of being revealed as not enough. When the wise men arrived asking about a king who had already been born, they were, without knowing it, striking the one fear Herod could never silence. His rage, that Greek phrase, ithumotheleian, was not cold political calculation. It was the reaction of a man whose illusion of control had collapsed. And here is the contradiction worth sitting with. Herod also built the temple. He poured enormous resources into the most sacred space in Jewish religious life, for a people who never fully embraced him. Psychologists call this reparative behavior, building outward monuments in an attempt to fill an inward emptiness that cannot be filled. The same man who ordered Bethlehem also built the house of God. That contradiction does not resolve neatly. It simply becomes more recognizably human. Herod spent his life building monuments so history would remember him as great. History did, but not the way he planned. His name survives primarily because of what he tried to destroy. The child escaped. The story continued, and 2,000 years later, we are still sitting with the grief of that small village, with Rachel weeping and no voice offering an answer. The mystery is not only whether the massacre happened, it is what it means that this story was told at all. That the most important narrative in Western history begins not in a throne room, but with ordinary mothers in a forgotten village, and a king who was afraid of an infant he had never seen. What does that say about power, about fear, about the kind of story God chose to enter, not from the top, but from below? Those questions have no clean answers, and perhaps that is exactly the point. If questions like these speak to you, if you want to look at the Bible through history, archaeology, and the deep patterns of human nature, subscribe to Eden Unsolved. We are not here to challenge your faith. We are here to go deeper with it. If this episode made you think, leave a like. It helps more people find this conversation.